Hi there. I welcome you back as we continue the conversation about key terms and concepts in the hospital revenue cycle team. This will be the first one on key terms and concepts, and a second one will be following to dive a little bit further. So thank you for joining us. So first, we'll go ahead and read over the disclaimer that I have as a part of every single presentation I do. Every effort has been taken by this author of this presentation to ensure that the information shared was current as possible at the time it was developed and presented here today. The primary intent of this presentation is to be informational only and to share this information in a manner that really makes sense and is more understandable to all of those in healthcare with various backgrounds and levels of experience. The information that is shared today is only intended to be informational and is not to take precedence over any state, local, federal guidelines, organizational policies, and/or procedures. Hi there, everyone. Again, what I pointed out in the first session, the importance of hospital revenue cycle, no money, no mission. And if we want a place to carry out the mission of caring for our patients, then we need to keep the hospital doors open. And as we continue the conversation, I just wanted to illustrate how important it is to have collaborative teams that we manage with our clinical patients, in as much as we need collaborative teams working with our hospital revenue cycle. Because without the hospital revenue cycle, there is no money to take care of the mission of caring for those patients that have diabetes or heart disease or other conditions that need hospital care. And the most important driver of the assignment of diagnoses and procedure codes that are critical to the information that is shared with many of those of us in healthcare is that documentation of the attending provider. Why is the documentation of the attending provider so critical? One, the number one reason, it provides for continuity of care between one provider to the following provider. Number two, it is to tell the accurate patient story. One of the problems we have with the onset of electronic records is the ability to cut and paste. I know it exists, but if we could all be mindful of what we copy and paste is relevant and continuous within the record. Meaning I've come across some records that in the beginning part it'll say patient's not responding to verbal stimuli, and then later on during the assessment planning and further documentation down below, it'll say how the patient is having an interactive conversation. So again, let's just please be consistent with that. I know we all have difficulties with the copy and paste. Also, it allows, most specifically, the specificity of the provider documentation provides the coder with the essential information that is critical to coding to the highest degree of specificity for that condition that the patient has. So again, just to illustrate the members of the hospital revenue cycle team, just to familiarize yourself with this, because many of you have not been exposed to this. So again, it is the attending provider that really ties in all the documentation from the consulting provider, from the pathology findings, from the x-ray findings. A coder will refer to those tests, see those tests, and if they see they're not documented in the attending provider's notes, then a query will be sent, and then the provider will need to answer that. Consulting provider are those findings in the consulting provider's notes not documented word for word, but for instance, if the consulting provider has a greater specificity of like CKD, chronic kidney disease stage 3, and that needs to be reflected in the attending provider's notes. Clinical documentation integrity professional or clinical documentation integrity specialist. Not all hospitals have one, but they are a vital part of the team that allow for concurrent review of the medical record to ensure that all of these aspects are tied in to the attending provider's documentation. We have coders that are trained professionals to abstract from the medical record and assign a code to every diagnosis or condition that is being monitored, treated, evaluated, causing increased length of stay, and also to every procedure that is being done. The denials team, again, that works on when we submit bills to a payer source, such as a commercial payer, a government payer, whatever payer source, and we get denied, this team of professionals works to ensure that we get appropriate reimbursement. Also, revenue integrity analyst or specialist that makes sure that we are compliantly attaching charges to codes and that we're using the codes appropriately and are in alignment with the guidance from the OIG, which is the Office of Inspector General. Hi, so we're going to continue this conversation, and I'm going to introduce some terminology to you that is used and that you may see used in terms of working with a coder or other areas of the hospital. So we're going to go over the primary diagnosis. That is really critical. That is the condition that required the most resources during the inpatient admission. In some occasions, it's the same as the principal diagnosis. And I'll illustrate to you why this is so important. There is only one primary or principal diagnosis that are assigned to an account. And the importance of that is it really drives the assignment to what's called a medical severity diagnosis related grouping. Now, to those of us who were in practice before the late 1980s when DRGs came into effect, which is diagnosis related groupings, these had to be learned and really evaluated in the context of how they relate to payment. But let me just repeat, the primary diagnosis is that diagnosis that required the most resources during the inpatient admission. And on some occasions, and most occasions actually, it is the same as the principal diagnosis. The other term that is used for principal diagnosis is that condition that bought the bed or that main condition that was the deciding factor for the provider to admit the patient. There's another term you're going to hear, secondary or other diagnoses. Those are conditions that may coexist at the time of admission or that develop subsequently after admission, or that affect the treatment received and or length of stay. This is conditions that we are working up through clinical evaluation, are receiving therapeutic treatment, diagnostic procedures to further work up, those conditions that extend the length of stay and or increase the nursing care and or monitoring for that patient. So all of these conditions need to have codes assigned to them. And nobody can read the provider's mind. So if you're thinking about something, write that thought process out. It helps justify the medical necessity for the bed in an inpatient acute care setting. Again, I just want to review some terminology that you're going to hear that you've heard me say, but I'm just going to repeat. Codes are alphanumeric, um, sometimes alpha, sometimes purely numeric, that are assigned to every single procedure and every single diagnosis that a patient is being treated for. So if there's a condition, uh, a diagnosis, there's going to be a code assigned to that. If there's a procedure, there's going to be a code. For procedures, there's CPT codes and what's called ICD-10 procedural classification system. For diagnosis codes, it's only ICD-10 CM codes. The medical severity diagnosed related group, the MS-DRG, is a group of diagnoses with similar intensity of resources that are needed to treat a group of similar conditions. Only one is assigned to each inpatient encounter, which is the reason why so much work is put in to clarify which primary diagnoses, because that drives which MSDRG group it is assigned to. The primary working diagnosis, in conjunction with the assignment of the secondary, encompass the information that is crucial for the selection of the MSDRG. Another term is relative weight, and you'll see the abbreviation RW. The MSDRG selection has a unique relative weight assigned to it. The relative weight is a heavy factor in the calculation of payment to the facility. The higher the relative weight, the higher the payment to the facility. You will also hear the term CMI, case mix index, and that speaks to the DRG average relative weight of a group of patients discharged from an inpatient status during a specific amount of time, for instance, beginning of December to the end of December. It reflects the increased complexity of a patient or cohort of patients and the subsequent more intense use of the increased use of resources to care for them. So the relative weight and the case mix index are closely intertwined. You will hear the term CC, a complicating or comorbid condition, which are those conditions that occur after admission and result in a prolonged length of stay. They were present, comorbid conditions are those that were present before admission to the hospital and resulted in increased length of stay because of their presence influence the care delivered to the patient. The major MCC complicating or comorbid conditions are those CCs that would result in even greater indication of the severity of illness of the patient and the resultant MSRD DRG assignment. Remember, if you're monitoring, treating, or working up a diagnosis, it should be documented, and your thought process behind that needs to be documented. Medicare collects all that data and uses it to obtain information regarding the incidence of certain diseases in the Medicare population of patients. It also provides critical information for medical necessity to justify the inpatient um, acute care hospital bed. And the reason why that's important is because if there's no medical necessity for the bed, then we're not going to get paid. If there's no medical reason that a patient needs to be in an inpatient bed in an acute care hospital, we do not receive payment. And again, this is important because if there's no money, there is no mission. Here are the list of references and resources I used for this presentation. So I hope you find them helpful. Once again, I thank you very much for attending this, and I hope that it encourages conversation and that we all learn and benefit from this. So thank you all very much. And again, we'll have another part regarding key terms and concept used in revenue cycle. Thank you.